Welcome everyone to Community Resilience Building, Getting on the Right Path Early and Often. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ruby Woodside. This webinar is brought to you by Second Nature in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording and the slides will be sent to all registrants in the days following the webinar. There will be a question and answer session at the end, and you can submit questions for the Q&A at any time using the questions function on your GoToWebinar panel. Second Nature would like to thank our corporate sponsors for making this webinar possible. All right, first of all, I'd like to just spend a brief moment going over the climate leadership commitments. Second Nature has recently updated and relaunched these commitments. Schools that were signatories of the American College and University's President Climate Commitment, which was known as the ACUPCC, are now signatories of the Carbon Commitment. As most of you probably know, the Carbon Commitment focuses solely on mitigating climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So schools that are signatories of the Carbon Commitment, if they would like to also work on improving climate resilience along with mitigation, they now have the option of joining the Climate Commitment. So the Climate Commitment focuses on both improving climate resilience as well as mitigating carbon emissions and achieving carbon neutrality. So this is really the most holistic approach to climate change. And then we also have the option of the Resilience Commitment for new schools joining the network that would like to only focus on improving resilience. So one of the main reasons that we've updated the commitments to include climate resilience is that it's really becoming increasingly clear that climate leadership is no longer just about mitigation. It's also important to have the capacity to respond and adapt to changes that we're already experiencing. So one of Second Nature's key goals for the new commitment is to focus on really proactive management and more integrated planning that takes advantage of opportunities, while at the same time minimizing the more reactive response to these unanticipated risks and vulnerabilities. Another key goal is to focus on the connection to the communities and other sectors that are outside of higher education. So we really want to recognize the role that higher education plays in leading a broader and more cohesive response to climate risks. And we really built this community connection into the new commitment, and today's webinar will cover some of the ways that schools can work with their community. Next slide. So the three commitments do have a common framework. The commitments are made by presidents or chancellors on behalf of their institution, and they're also designed to engage all students. And then most notably here, the Sustainability Planning and Climate Action Guide. This is an online resource which can help schools implement any of the commitments. And this is really a big component of the integrated planning that we're talking about. So this guide, which is on our website, includes ways to organize your campus and community. It talks about how to make partnerships, and it includes several building blocks focusing on mitigation, climate resilience, and other tools that can help you make decisions for your school and also to help develop your climate action plan. Next slide. So now just to focus a bit more on some of the goals of the Resilience Commitment. So with the Carbon Commitment, the goal is carbon neutrality, which is it's an easily definable target. Climate resilience is a bit more challenging, and it's a much kind of broader idea. Second Nature is using the definition of resilience to be the ability to survive disruption and to anticipate, adapt, and flourish in the face of change. So we made this definition positive because we really want to be proactive, as I mentioned before, and we want to look for a positive version of the future. So in other words, it's not just focusing on reducing vulnerability or weathering intense storms, but we really want schools to think about how to adapt and to thrive in the face of change. Next slide. So in terms of implementing the Resilience Commitment, some of the key components that we focus on are partnerships with the community, as I mentioned before, and then again the idea of proactive and integrative planning. And then we also think about both adaptive capacity, so this means things that enhance your ability to respond to changes, for example, a well-educated population, as well as adapted infrastructure. So an example of that would be proper storm barriers that protect the population against severe weather events. So in other words, we really encourage schools to think about both being adaptive as well as having well-adapted infrastructure that prepares you for the changes that are going to be felt in your region. Next slide. So now I'm just going to briefly go through Second Nature's framework for resilience planning, and then this is basically the framework for how you would implement the resilience commitment. Next slide. So within the first year of signing the commitment, we're asking schools to develop a campus community task force. So most campuses already have some relationships with the community or some groups that they're working with in the community. So this task force, it doesn't need to be something entirely new. However, we do think it's really important to identify key stakeholders and to develop relationships that go beyond the campus boundaries. So again, the idea of resilience is really branching out beyond campus to work with the greater community. Next slide. So then the first step after developing the task force is to undertake a resilience assessment. So the resilience assessment, it focuses on really identifying strengths and weaknesses of both the campus and the greater community, and then ideally you would look at overlaps between the campus and the community. The idea is that this can really help schools identify some of their priorities and some of the preliminary indicators of resilience. According to our framework, schools would have 1 year to complete this resilience assessment. So that would be the second year after signing the resilience commitment. Next slide. So then once schools have done the initial resilience assessment, the next step we suggest is that schools think about their ideal future scenarios. So what this means is that this is really about the vision for the future that schools have. And so it's where the school, where the campus, and the community would see yourself and where you'd like to be in an ideal world. Next step. So at this point, you have an idea of your current strengths and weaknesses from the resilience assessment, and you also have an idea of where your campus and community would like to go in the future. So from here, the next step is to identify some of the risks posed by climate change to this future. So this is where you focus more on the climate projections for your region, and you start to bring in some of the climate data. And then you want to map out where those climate risks might impact your ideal future scenarios. And then where they could also make potential current weaknesses a real vulnerability for the school. So next slide. Finally, the last step is to develop action steps and set goals as to how you're going to work on improving your climate resilience. So this is where you really prioritize action and develop your climate action plan, or if your school is already a signatory to the carbon commitment, you would update your current climate action plan to incorporate some of the resilience work that you have done. Next slide. So that was just a very brief summary of the implementation framework that Second Nature is suggesting. And I do want to mention that this appears very linear, but I don't think that the process is necessarily that linear. We definitely recognize that there is a lot of back and forth between different steps, or, for example, some schools may do multiple parts of this at once. This is really just a guideline, and it's not meant to be prescriptive. Also, I just want to share that if you have any resilience-specific questions, you can always email us at resilience@secondnature.org. Next slide. So now I want to pass it over to Dr. Adam Whelchel, who is the Director of Science at the Nature Conservancy. Adam has a long career working with diverse groups on team building, strategic planning, and community resilience. Adam is also the architect of the Community Resilience Building Workshop System, which is a tool that can help campuses implement part of their resilience commitment. So with that, I will turn it over to Adam to hear more about this.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me well. Thanks so much, Ruby, for the introduction. Again, my name is Adam Whelchel, and I've been working with communities, about 35 communities or so over the last 10 years, providing guidance, coaching, facilitation to try to move communities up on the path to resilience early and often. And I'll underscore often, as Ruby pointed out, this does tend to be a dynamic path that most communities or campuses take. So over the last 10 years, I have done a lot of listening, my team and myself, and learning from a tremendous amount of mistakes and tackling head-on some of the challenges that are reflected in some of the questions that you all have already provided to Second Nature, and we'll hopefully have a chance to discuss at the end. And if you do have comments or questions along the path here, please do utilize the chat function, and we'll gather those up and talk about them at the end. So over the last 10 years, working with 35 communities, we've made a lot of mistakes and we've learned a lot of lessons, and ultimately what we've done is we've compiled it all into a both useful and usable framework and process known as the Community Resilience Building. And so I was, about 6 months ago or so, I was very excited to meet the great people at Second Nature and to really, as many of you have, and to really discover and get a better understanding of the resilience commitment framework and approach that Ruby has just laid out. And through those conversations, it became quite apparent that this community resilience building workshop process may actually be a very good fit and may provide a way for you all to realize the resilient commitments that you have or will sign on with Second Nature. So I have one promise for you today. I promise to stay on time, and I promise to share a few things that I believe will be helpful for you. All I require is your attention, or perhaps 50% of your attention. I'll take that. That's fine. And any thoughts that you might have on how this might connect to where you are in your path to resilience. And again, hopefully we'll be able to fulfill those questions at the end here. And so the offer for you alongside Second Nature here is to provide you with a tool and a process that would hopefully enable you to fulfill both your resilient commitment, but most importantly, take some real steps here to create some resilient campuses and those connections with the communities that you all exist within. Next. So as I mentioned, the process I'm going to be describing is the Community Resilience Building Workshop Guide, and there's a website that I'll be reinforcing throughout here where you can get all this information if we go too quickly. Next. So as I mentioned, it really has been tried, tested, and is now trusted by over 35 communities, principally municipalities, but we do make a concerted effort to really roll in and attach any kind of planning to both the secondary, primary, and higher education institutions that are part and parcel of these particular communities. The key thing about this process is that it's flexible. It can be used anywhere and at any scale, both large campuses, small campuses, rural to urban types of campuses, public, private, 4-year, 2-year, you name it. And it also has the flexibility to tackle any scale, whether it's a single, remote, isolated satellite campus, or if it's part of a regional network or a multi-state network, whatever it might be. There's an anywhere and any scale type flexibility that's built into the process. It is very much a process that's about building community, therefore it's very much driven by the community. It does put a lot of emphasis on partnerships and stakeholders and thinking about the folks that make decisions, influence decisions, or are affected by those decisions that are made, whether it's the campus or the adjoining community, municipalities, NGOs, businesses, you name it. It can tackle and integrate any type of hazard, and if you're not familiar with using terms like hazards, it's really thinking about things such as wildfire, drought, earthquakes, flooding, anything that's connected to natural disasters, extreme events, or subtle changes such as changes in climate, as we'll start seeing as we progress through the century. So you can tackle the immediate extreme events, but also the slower evolving types of hazards, such as connected to climate change. And then also it allows you to take a deeper look at safety, health, sustainability, equity, and things of those natures that are already part of what you're doing. So it's designed to change if needed. the approach that's taken towards resilience. It's designed to shift as needed or to simply integrate into existing processes that are already going, whether it's a natural hazard mitigation plan, a master plan, a climate-related plan, etc. Next slide. So really at the core of the community resilience building workshop process is this idea of pre, during, and post. And again, it's very much focused on the workshop, the community-driven, the community dialogue. And the community is broken up into three simple but not so simple components, and you can see them on the right-hand side there. It's the infrastructure, societal, and the environment within which the campus or the community sits and resides. The first step is really, and I'll be stepping through these quickly in sequential order following this alphanumerical kind of breakdown. The first is really about preparing for the workshop, A, and then B through F are really about what happens within the workshops as the community gathers to deliberate and have dialogue on exactly what resilience is and what are the actions that one can take to move towards resilience. And then finally G, which is really moving forward. So this process is an ideal starter kit, if you will, to really hit on some of those key steps in the resilient commitment. And I'll be stepping through each one of these rather quickly, but again, everything is available on communityresiliencebuilding.com. Next slide, please. So the key first step that you're all contemplating, or you wouldn't be on this call, is to think about what resilience actually means for you on your campus, in your network of campuses, within your campus community kind of continuum there. And so each page of the guidebook is broken into some basic elements. At the top you'll have that alpha and then connecting to the numerical on the left-hand side. But you'll have the objective of each step in the workshop process. Top of the left-hand column above the photo there, you'll have the directions of what actually takes place in that step. On the right-hand side, the right-hand column, you'll have guiding questions, and then you'll always have an inset box with examples. So it's meant to be a very useful and user-friendly kind of guide that you can pick up and take action within your own particular community. But the first really key step, as is laid out here, is really defining, getting consent of leadership, developing a core team, setting goals, and being specific as you can about time-dependent objectives and things of that nature. So typical front-end team building and team starting kind of steps. Next slide, please. And so just to go back here, so that would be A, and then you would move into B through F, and I'll go through those as well. Next slide, please. So as some of you who have worked with trying to move groups towards some kind of change or shift or integration of something new, one of the key dynamics that we play with here in the Community Resilience Building Workshop is really this large group, small group, large group kind of dynamic. And so we use the large group to introduce concepts and begin the process of dialogue, but really utilize small groups, 8 to 10 people being optimal, to really hone in on some of the key steps in this particular process, identifying top hazards, defining strengths and vulnerabilities, and then developing actions that will reduce vulnerabilities or reinforce strengths, and then bringing it back to the large group to normalize the information generated by the small groups and turn it into at least an agreement, and in rare cases consensus. Next step, please. The first big step here is characterizing your hazards, and this gives you an opportunity to ask some probing questions. You know, what hazards have impacted your community in the past, where, how often, and in what ways, what hazards are impacting your community currently, and then leaning forward with the best available climate science to start thinking about what the implications are of those hazards 5 years, 10 years, 25, 50 years, whatever it might be. That's appropriate for the community. Next, please. The key tool that we utilize here, and again, it's designed to be relatively simple and straightforward. One of the key learned lessons we had early on was when you work with communities, you typically end up in circular conversations, and so we developed this risk matrix, this spreadsheet that you see at the bottom, which is designed to move in a linear fashion communities towards self-awareness around vulnerabilities and strengths, but then really listing out actions, putting some priority on it, and then putting time on it, and really walking out with a resilient action plan, or at least a start towards that. And so this is really the fulcrum of the workbench from which all of the dialogue is captured, and then it turns into a tool that can be used going forward. The risk matrix as you see it there, and I'll show you some real examples in a moment. Next slide, please. This is the first step. This is C. This is the first step in filling out the risk matrix. And again, it hones in on infrastructure, societal, and environmental as those key community characteristics or building blocks. It asks you to list features. It could be a library or a gymnasium that provides sheltering for a student body, etc. Where is it on campus? Who owns it? There's a big participatory mapping piece to this, so you're engaging the community ideally in a very fun and proactive way to really identify where those strengths and vulnerabilities are. And again, you're utilizing the left-hand side of the risk matrix in this case. Next slide, please. And I know I'm moving kind of fast on this, but the second step is to take that longer list of vulnerabilities and strengths and work to the right and crosswalk it against the various hazards that are listed, the top hazards for the community, and develop actions. For example, say a campus did not have adequate sheltering facility for the 10,000 person student body, then one of the actions would be to seek ways to establish a collaborative MOU or relationship with the adjoining municipality to shelter X number of students to get at a percentage goal of sheltering for both community members as well as campus members. And so that would be an action that would be taken in the event of a hurricane. And then you would go ahead and identify a large number of actions. And then the hard part for the communities, but one of the most essential pieces, is they're asked to take all of those potential actions that they could take and assign a relative priority to it. Is it something that's absolutely high priority, has to be done? Is it a medium or a low? And then we ask them to determine urgency. Is it something that's part of a longer-term planning horizon, or is it something that has to be done right away? For instance, extra generators in the case of emergency to provide localized power, or perhaps it's a microgrid which might provide redundancy and supply of power, but that might be a longer time that will require some capital planning, etc. And then obviously a lot of the strengths, such as communications networks, things of those nature, evacuation routes, are more of an ongoing type thing because that's viewed as a strength. So this really is the process through which a long list of potential actions are both prioritized and assigned time, which are really critical ingredients to generating a competent, resilient action plan. Next slide, please. And so this is just an example of what an amalgamation across a few different communities have come up with. And again, this is all available in the guidebook on the website, and you can take some time to review and see the kind of actions that people came up with. And again, I think what you'll find is that it's a great way to get a lot of information quickly, have that community dialogue around it, and then use that as a springboard or a platform from which you would delve into much more specific and much more directed types of actions. But this provides a milestone, a touch point, a time and place where the community actually embarked on the path to resilience. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, it's very people-centric. It's really about listening and learning and exchanging and capturing it all in a competent and responsible and directed kind of forum. Next slide, please. For you that are facilitators or have worked with groups, you'll particularly appreciate this one's towards the back of the guide. There's a quick reference here that gives you the breakdown of the different steps. It gives you the triggering questions that you would use to solicit information about the top hazards for the community, the vulnerabilities and strengths for the infrastructure, societal, environmental, and it gives you the guide as to where you would capture that information on the risk matrix. So for any of you facilitation geeks out there, such as myself, this is this is this is gold. Next slide, please. And then really pulling it together. It's one thing to have a conversation and a dialogue and populate a risk matrix, but what really needs to happen ultimately is some kind of roll-up, some kind of summary of findings from a particular time and place that can serve a core team or future meetings to really put this into action. So this is a really critical step that sometimes gets forgotten, but I wanted to make sure that this was front and center in your deliberations and is part of the Community Resilience Building Workshop Guide. Next slide, please. And so just to recap a little bit here, in my mind, I loved what Ruby had said and what's built into the Second Nature's Resilient Commitment, this idea of a couple key words, this idea of anticipate, adapt, flourish, thrive, absolutely. And from my perspective, one of the key goals should be this idea, whether it's this idea of creating irresistible and sustainable momentum through collaboration and routine action over time. Again, I really think that the strengths of this process is as a starter kit, but the idea of continuing that collaboration and the routine action over time is really a critical, essential ingredient that should be part of your pre-thinking in that A1 step of preparing for the workshop. Do you have the team to sustain this over time, or is it something we did and will remain something we did versus something that we act on? But to give you a recap, the workshop guide enables you to identify top hazards, again, as a community. It enables you to identify its strengths and vulnerabilities, and Ruby alluded to this as well. It's really key to focus in on strengths that provides a positive pivot point or a building block going forward. What have you already done or are doing that is working and is actually providing resilience? And a variable could be some of your sustainability actions as well. The process enables you to prioritize community actions or campus actions, enables you to generate a resilient action plan that's a living document. And the workshops can be rather intense and very quick. I typically do workshops that are in the 6-hour range for communities that are pretty enabled and ready to go. The alternative option is 2 4-hour workshops spread over a 2-week period or so that enable folks to really focus in on hazards the first few steps and then work through the subsequent steps of the process. But it's a relatively low cost type of approach, cost being time. In this regard, but it does take the right people at the right time and a community with leadership in place to really make one of these really work. Next slide, please. Again, just reinforcing the steps here and never forgetting the move forward step at the end there. Next step. Everything can be found on the website. The guide's up there. There's summary finding reports as examples. There's even surveys you can do to get a handle on your community characterization survey to see whether where people are in the continuum of resilience. There's a suggested invitation list for participants that have worked well in previous workshops, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of good information on there. Next slide, please. And then finally, so just to recap here, what are the benefits to you and your campus of thinking about or utilizing the Community Resilience Workshop Guide? So as I mentioned, it really is tested and trusted, and as Ruby pointed out, that this potentially could be used to fulfill or take some meaningful steps towards fulfilling your resilient commitment. which if you haven't signed up, I'm sure you will be. It really does provide a way to strengthen community through collaborative dialogue. And I don't use words like collaborative and dialogue too lightly. Those are sincere commitments to sharing and listening and a commitment to making some differences. The third is really identifying the ability to identify and prioritize meaningful actions for your campus, where campus is. One of the key benefits, obviously, is to enhance the safety for students, faculty, staff, and facilities in times of extreme events. It also provides a way or a mechanism through which collaboration with the surrounding communities can take place. That's really key. We don't exist. There's always a network from which communities can benefit from each other, so it's a really good way to do that, whether it's pulling in the town planner or the city manager or the emergency management professionals from the municipality. Perhaps it's pulling in the high school system or the superintendent of schools, et cetera, from other communities, but really public works, whatever it might be, really pulling in those professionals that can be and can contribute to a larger perspective on resilience, because many times the risks that we face really don't stay within those nice, tightly defined spatial boundaries, town boundaries, campus boundaries, whatever it might be. So it really behooves us to be operating at a scale that matches the potential risk or the benefit of strengths. And then finally, the key thing here is that this offers you a efficient and effective, useful, usable way to establish your campus as a leader in this critical and emerging space. This is an issue that's not going away, and we really do need to adapt and anticipate and flourish, and those that do, those that have a plan, will ultimately be first in line when it comes time for potential funding and things of those natures. So I think that's really key. This offers an opportunity to step in and assert in a leadership role amongst your peers. Next slide, please. And then finally here, just to recap, again, this really is kind of an out-of-the-box process to help you complete your steps. My offer to you is that there is guidance and coaching and facilitation available to make sure that there's a deeper understanding and an appreciation for this, and then ultimately that the community resilience building is really about, again, creating that irresistible moths to a flame kind of thing and sustainable momentum through collaborative and routine action over time. Next. I think that's it. Yeah, and so here's the website again. So yeah, thank you so much for paying attention. I certainly do appreciate that. And at this point, I'll just reinforce the offer that I am available and am looking for, in partnership with Second Nature, to connect with and I'll get some of you, hopefully, up on the path to resilience early and often. So with that, I'll say thank you very much and turn it back to you, Ruby.
Yes, great. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Okay.
So we have plenty of time left for question and answer, so feel free to submit questions through the Q&A box on your GoToWebinar. But for now, we've had a few questions. Adam, I'm wondering, so one thing that we've heard from a lot of schools is they have been asking how to identify, and you mentioned this a little bit, but different stakeholders within the community and what is the best way to approach them, if they're asking them to join this workshop or to join a task force. And you mentioned that the tool has a suggested invitation list, and we kind of talked about some of the disaster preparedness. Can you talk a little bit more about ways to identify stakeholders in the community and ways to reach out to them and kind of some of the preparation work that goes into, getting ready for these workshops?
Yeah. Just as a quick resource for you, on page 5 of the guidebook, you'll see there's actually a whole page dedicated to engaging stakeholders, and there's a really excellent resource coming out of NOAA that's listed, a website that's listed on a PDF that's listed on the right-hand side there that I think will really, it's just an excellent way of helping you ask the right questions to make sure that you get the right people in the room. And just putting it broadly, I do think about participants in three general buckets. One is the obvious, the folks that really do make decisions about capital expenditures, facilities, just as an example, maintenance, things of that nature. It could be, folks that make decisions about programming or whatever it might be. So those that make decisions, people that make decisions. The second are people that influence decision makers, which can be a little bit cryptic, but they need to be identified because they can really be a make or break kind of individual in a particular community. And then where it gets a little bit remote or more difficult are you want to have some voices from those that are going to be influenced by the decision. I guess in a campus situation it might be, the student body. Maybe there's a particular group that is particularly vocal or represents a large majority of students, etc., or a minority of students that would need to be involved in any kind of discussions, because ultimately any decisions that made will affect them. In a municipal setting, it can be very broad. It can be, I mentioned emergency management, the likely suspects, emergency management, engineering, public works. But I think it also requires a broader net to be cast, and it could involve, the Board of Finance, legal, if there's a neighborhood revitalization kind of coordinator or department, going a little bit broader, public library system, small and minority business resource offices, things of that nature, and trying to pick up on that. Some of the key entities that are often left off the table connect with societal needs, such as faith-based organizations, nursing or hospice, things of that nature that tie into the social elements of what it takes to keep a community healthy before, after, or forever. But there is a list of, so I'd recommend going to NOAA that I referenced, or is referenced on page 5, and then also there's a good list to start with from a municipal perspective on the website.
Great, thank you. Let's see, another question we had was about some of the planning process. So discuss ways in which a sustainability plan, the campus master plan, and a resilience plan could complement each other. So I think this question really speaks to, the emphasis on integrated planning, right? So campus plans, they have, that's kind of longer term strategic goals for the school. Ideally the sustainability and resilience plan should support these goals. So on one side, you'd want the sustainability plan to relate back to the overall priorities of the university and really show how sustainability is contributing to the overarching, strategic priorities or goals of the school. And then on the resilience piece, it's essentially, how are you going to make sure that your school is able to achieve its long-term goals? So bringing it back into the context of our framework that I mentioned earlier, the campus master plan could be thought of as your vision for the future, and in an ideal world, where does your school want to go? And so the climate action plan, including both climate resilience and other sustainability mitigation efforts, that should really support how your school is going to achieve that overall vision. Did you want to add anything to that one, Adam?
Yeah, I think, well, you mentioned sustainability, so that's something we defined 30 years ago or so, back in the 80s, and I think you'll find in most corporations and a lot of campuses, and you'll have officers of sustainability. You might even have teams, certainly in municipalities. And so, lessons learned there, it's far easier initially to look for ways to integrate into existing plans, teams, processes, funding tracks, than it is to try to invent something separate. So yeah, I think your guidance is right on the money, and even if it's simply a chapter in the master plan to start with, that's a noble goal.
Great. We had another question from the audience asking, so what do you do if your city already has a plan by the time we get to workshopping? And I know that this is certainly the case in a lot of schools that are part of larger cities that are already working on climate resilience and already have climate action plans. And so this is where we'd say that it really, the way you approach this, it really is going to depend on your particular school and community situation. So if it's a smaller school in a large city, of course you're not going to write a resilience plan for the entire city, but we would suggest that, if your town or city already has a plan, someone from the university should be represented and attending those meetings. And then as you write and develop your own resilience action plan, making sure that that aligns with the broader city plan, and making sure that there are some strategic alliances there. And then also just thinking about, the campus and your school is likely a resource for the city. So we are really pushing schools to think about, well, what is your role in the broader community? Did you want to add anything to that, Adam? Have you seen any situations where you've done this workshop in places that already have developed resilience action plans?
Yes. I've had to go back to some communities several times that using the word often there. Yes, and yeah, you nailed it, Ruby. Absolutely. Yeah, I just to add real quick. I mean, so if it's been done before, or I think the important thing would be just to really get a really keen sense on how your needs as an entity are really, within a particular municipality was represented. Does it actually reflect? Does it give an accurate portrait of what you can provide or what your needs might be in the context of a municipality coming up with their own plan? So I'm just curious, Ruby, you make a big point about campus connections to community, but what if the community is already feeling like they're on this path to resilience, if you will, and they feel as if they've already included the voices from the campuses, but the campuses don't feel as if they've really been heard once they really some time's gone by, or they've re-examined or reevaluated where they want to go and it doesn't quite fit. I think it would just be really, that's where the strengths of relationships with the planning teams in the municipality becomes really important, and that's just something that needs to be cultivated and nurtured. And obviously the stronger the relationships, the greater the clarity and the reflection of the needs of the campus will be.
Yeah, and I think that just again speaks to the importance of developing relationships, and the stronger relationships are, then the more adaptive capacity and the more, ultimately the more resilient and adaptive you're going to be, regardless to the change that's going to be felt.
Yeah, agreed.
So another question that we had earlier, a couple questions regarding how to effectively communicate resilience, or the importance of resilience to the community, and then also how to engage the local community if they don't seem to feel the same degree of urgency that we do. So that's an interesting question, and we've certainly heard, a lot of schools that are in situations where they're struggling because they might have one view of climate action and the surrounding campus doesn't necessarily. So there are definitely kind of a lot of cases where you just need to be very sensitive of politics and kind of be aware of the local situation and how you're approaching local stakeholders. Adam, do you have any experiences that could speak to that?
Yeah. I can think of one situation where there's a rather large university in a rather small municipality, and one of the key resources that we all need is good, clean, readily abundant drinking water. And so there's been a lot of extraction, or there's generally a lack of water, enough water today, let alone thinking about in the future, perhaps in some of our more challenged locations, southwest, for example, of the United States, that might actually be facing some serious issues today that require some planning to ensure and anticipate the future changes that are coming down the line, especially when growth of is factored in, economic, social, etc. So yeah, I think that so the communication piece, there's always opportunities to do that, but unless you're really hitting on something that's readily apparent, super obvious, and urgent, it does present a bit of challenge to be asking people to plan for something that's either way off in the future or is not a super apparent um, situation that requires behavioral changes now. It is a bit of a communication challenge, but I think the key messages for leadership that I always go back to is this idea that, play once. The idea of getting ahead of this now, that there's a cost to inaction, and that this notion that there is a way to avoid future costs and pay once. I'm thinking, for example, say you were living in an area or you were the facilities manager for a campus that was subjected to flash flooding, and you had a serious concern with undersized culverts on your campus, which resulted in backing up and flooding of really a really expensive and important sports facility or something like that. You can ignore it and just deal with some quick fixes, sandbagging, things of that nature. But as we go 20, 30 years down the line, this idea of flash flooding might actually be more routine and regular. And so the expense sunk into putting in larger culverts now might actually pay for itself tenfold down the road. So those are the kind of internal kind of considerations that need to happen. How you communicate that out to the broader public or the broader campus is important, but needs to be properly thought through in a strategic, methodical type way.
Great, thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. Let's see, another question that we have is, so what are some of the most challenging aspects of this process, and what are some of the common challenges in these community resilience building workshops?
Well, some of the most difficult challenges can be right off the bat getting consent of leadership. And consent of leadership in the best situation means actually having a core team that's reflecting the needs or the is reflecting the community, has the latitude and has been sanctioned in a way to go forward, because you really need to have that core team in place in order to be responsible for what's generated and the outcomes that are eventually achieved. So that's really key. It can be somewhat challenging to you mentioned the communication thing. Get the right people in the room, convince that this is worth your time, this is worth your while, and this is why. That takes, again, a track record of and some relationship building there. Yeah, and I think once you achieve those two basic steps and you actually get people into the room, the process really takes care of the rest. It's really interesting. Once you provide people with some clarity on what the steps are, and that I mentioned the large to small group kind of dynamics, that really works well. And the really key thing, obviously, is one of the reasons why the small group discussions are so important. And there's a whole art to how you assign people to small groups, but that the small group allows for all voices to be heard. It's really, we've got some basic fundamental needs as human beings. We want to be heard. We want to feel as if we've contributed, and ultimately we want to be appreciated. Those are kind of the three basic things that I've tried to build in here. And if you can get leadership in place, you can compel people and convince people that this is worth their time. The process will take care of itself, because it really does focus in on this idea of allowing everybody to be heard. Everybody walks away with a great feeling that they've contributed, and ultimately, regardless of what some of the outcomes are or how they challenge their perspective positions or etc., there is an appreciation that this was an important step forward, and ultimately there's a core team in place, ideally, that can really make it happen.
Thank you. That's great. And just to kind of add on, so another some of the challenges we've heard from schools that are doing some resilience work but don't necessarily feel like they have a lot of, not necessarily all the support that they need from administration, or they, their school hasn't signed the climate commitment yet, but they would like to. And I think that just goes back to, there's a lot of uncertainty, as I mentioned before, as to kind of what the definition of resilience is. So that's where I would say it's important to focus on the inclusivity of resilience and how it's, it's really about building relationships with all these different stakeholders and groups, and how it really is a way to kind of make sure that a campus is able to achieve its long-term strategic goals. So it's just a way to kind of promote and support the strategic planning that a campus already has. So let's do one last question to wrap it up. So we have, what are examples of success from communities that have used this process, and what are some interesting outcomes or results? So let's end on a positive note. Do you have any examples that really stand out in your mind, Adam, as having been successful?
Yeah, there's one in particular in a municipality. They went through the workshop, and more importantly, they really had a commitment to resilience. And they had an established team in town that was really focused on sustainability, and the same people just embraced a wider suite of actions. And there was a referendum in town. They were redoing their high school, and they had two options: one cheaper option, one more expensive option. And the more expensive option, which would have been an additional $25 per household per year for like 20 years, a bonding package, was to put in a hurricane-proof roof and retrofit the high school, to accommodate sheltering facilities for not just their community but the adjoining communities. And the community 70-30% voted for the hurricane-proof roof and the additional sheltering facilities, and that has really led to a lot of cross partnerships on a lot of different recreational, education, and social services kind of engagements. So it's been kind of a spark that has really been a very affirmative step forward in the resilience bucket for this particular community.
Great.
Yeah.
So I think we'll wrap it up for today, and thank you very much to Adam and to everyone who's been listening to this webinar. Just again, we'll be sending out the recording to all registrants, and it'll also be available on our website. And then, as Adam mentioned, you can find the Community Resilience Building tool on communityresiliencebuilding.com, and feel free to reach out to Second Nature for any questions regarding the commitment or other resources to help you work on resilience on your campus. So thanks a lot.